It's been a while. I know, guys. I've been busy. Um, I'm self-employed, as I explained before, so there's always a lot of stuff going on, running several businesses actually. So it's been hard to keep everything going at the same time, which meant that MMA Formula had to take a little bit of a backseat for the last few months. So I'm trying to get back into the swing of things and watched UFC 280 yesterday. It was a fun card. Overall, some surprises, some good stuff, some bad stuff, and I'll go over that. Um, let's look at the first fight of the main card. I'm only going to look at the main card because I like to focus on those. Caitlin Chookagian versus Manon Fiorot. That wasn't the most impressive fight from either woman. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of Chookagian. There's nothing wrong with her in any way, but mostly because she throws a lot of volume, but I don't think she packs enough punch. If she would focus a little bit more on just having a little bit more power in her punches and kicks, then she would get a lot further, in my opinion. So we're looking here at the stats from the UFC website itself, and you can see that she had budget strikes, total strikes was about 76 versus 99 for opponent Fiorot. Here's the thing: when you look at the fight itself, there's a lot of action. There's a lot of, especially punches, especially from Caitlyn, but not that much land. And when it does, it doesn't really do any damage. I mean, look at Manon's face afterwards. She's not damaged at all. And the same is unfortunately true for Manon because she also didn't land all that many strikes with significant power. She's able to do better. I've seen her fight and hit harder and land shots, but she seemed unwilling to close the distance when she had ample opportunity to do so. Where she seemed to be a little bit too impressed by Shukagian's offense, who would throw up punches, straight punches, follow up with a kick or whatever. Furo could have easily stepped in on that, countered, and so on. So and that's my main gripe with this fight is it felt kind of like a more like a sparring session than actually a real fight with a lot of impact and a lot of significant strikes. So not that impressed. The biggest issue I saw with Furo is she fights as a southpaw. She continuously moved to her left side. That puts her square in the line of sight of Shukagian's power side, which is a little bit of an irony to call her rear side a power side, because even if she uses it, it's not that powerful in my opinion. But regardless, tactically speaking, Furo made just a huge mistake throughout the whole fight, always moving to her left. It's not absolute, but a good standard way of fighting as a southpaw is when you use your lead foot to always be at the outside of the lead foot of your opponent. That gives you the better angle. It keeps you safer and it gives you a better angle to use your own power side. Furo hardly ever did that. I even saw her steps just square in the middle, on the center line, straight in the middle, at Chukagian, in the middle of both her feet, which meant that she's just begging to get punched in the face. So I have no idea why Fiora did that. I also have no idea why the coaches didn't tell her to just stop. God damn it, walking towards your left, go towards your right. They didn't do that. You remember when we had McGregor fighting Eddie Alvarez. Eddie afterwards said, "I have no idea why I fucked up like that because I was supposed to move to my right and I always moved to my left, walking into punches. I have no idea why I fucked up because we planned on moving to on using that angle and stepping to the right. So maybe that's what happened. That for some reason Fiorot just decided that okay, I'm just not gonna use my advantage and fight in a tactically pretty stupid manner. But regardless, she got the win, so good for her. I hope to see better of her. Shukegi, again, I'm not a huge fan, and when I say not a huge fan, I'm always talking about technique and just fighting skill. Never as a person. I don't know her. She seems like a nice girl, but I have no idea. So it's always about the fighters themselves and what they do in the octagon as opposed to the other stuff. So that's very short about this first fight. Again, wasn't that great of a fight, but whatever. Moving on to Banil Darius versus Matthias Gamrod. Um, Overall, I think deserved victory. Um, Darius has a little bit of a dangerous fighting style in which that he likes to lean forward. He's heavy on that lead foot often, and that is a danger not only to get punched in the face, obviously, and kicked, but also that the guy like Gamrod who showed. I mean, we know that he's excellent on the ground, obviously, but it was pretty interesting how he would shoot in and go for takedowns, and was pretty successful at that. I mean, I'm looking here at the stats for takedowns. Um, didn't get to do a lot of submissions attempts at all, uh, but he did it quite well. So for me it was interesting to see how Dariush would handle that, and he handled it well. I mean, if you look at the fight, he managed the ground game of Gamrot quite well. So in that regard, I would say it's an excellent victory for him. I think the most important aspect is obviously total strikes. He threw 67 versus 38. That said, Gamrot had 4 takedowns. But then if you go round by round, you'll see that it becomes a little bit more of the advantage for Dariush. When you see for the second round, he got 32 strikes versus 15 and a 1 takedown. But Dariush had 31 significant strikes. And again, we can argue about the way that UFC scores these kind of things. I'm not going to argue about that. I have my own opinions about how the judges score, and we'll get to that when we get to the Peter Yan fight. But the point is that this kind of stuff is a little bit open to interpretation. It shouldn't be, but it is. So then when you look at the third round, you see that Darius has 22 strikes versus 10, and then only 1 takedown by Gamrod and 19 significant strikes for Darius versus 9. And that famous, by now knockdown. That knockdown was a thing of beauty. You could see that Gamrot was trying to get in, get close, and looking for an opening, and you could see that Dariush was actually just waiting for him, and he showed him the uppercut a little bit, did a bit of a feint, and then just timed it perfectly and flash knockdown. Gamrot is he's a badass motherfucker. I mean, he got up right away. He was down, but if you've been hit by these kind of flash knockdowns, you're out like a light, and typically you're just back to yourself immediately. That's what it looked like to me. That he ate the punch, he got right back up again, and immediately went back to working. So really excellent fight. Um, I wouldn't say that Gamrot is the loser here of the fight in the sense that he didn't get beat up at all. Darius couldn't really, except for that one knockdown, I mean, threaten him tremendously, in my opinion. He didn't land that many strikes over the full fight. I mean, he landed 59 strikes, significant strikes, throughout the whole fight. Versus 33 for Gamrot, that's not huge when it goes to volume. And Gamrot got to do a bunch of takedowns and try his best to get it to the ground and score from there. It wasn't successful, but he did it. I like the striking, was pretty good as well. He just didn't use that much of it, given the focus on the ground game. So that's pretty much it. Again, not the best fight, not the worst fight, but deserved win for Dariush. No complaints there. And then we get to Peter Yan versus Sean O'Malley. Um, I was watching it with my kids yesterday, and we were like, this is some bullshit. Peter Yan's getting robbed. That was my first impression. Um, I, I rewatched the fight and looked at the scorecards, and we're going to go over this a little bit. So this is the official scorecard for the official statistics from the UFC. So let's look at the full fight first. So 97 versus 91 strikes for Sean, 6 takedowns versus 0 takedowns for Sean. And then we have 58 significant strikes for Peter and 84 for Sean O'Malley. So when you look at it overall, okay, that gives you a certain big picture, but we have to look at round by round. So if you go to round 1, So the total strikes is pretty even, 28 versus 23, but you got one takedown for Peter Yan. Then you've got significant strikes, 19 versus 23, so that's pretty close. So I would give that first round to Peter, because there's only 4 less significant strikes, but there is one additional takedown. So then we get back to how do judges score this kind of stuff. I mean, don't get me started. Don't get me started. But I think that is one critical part of where the problems rise. So we're moving on to round number 2. 45 strikes for Jan, 22 for Sean O'Malley, 3 takedowns for Jan, and 24 significant strikes. Remember that round? There's no discussion. Jan won that round. There's if you think he didn't, I mean, I don't know what to tell you, but you were watching a different fight than I did. So we skip ahead to round number 3, and there it gets interesting. So you've got 24 total strikes from Jan and 46 from Sean O'Malley. So that's almost twice as many total strikes. So the volume is definitely there. Peter did, I should say Piotr, but I'm gonna say we use Peter because that was most people use now. He got 2 takedowns, and he didn't get very far with submissions or anything. But I thought he had overall whenever he went to the ground. I mean, it was clear that he was dominating, but that apparently the judges don't care about that in this fight. But when you look at significant strikes, you see that Jan only had 15 and Sean O'Malley had 40. So that's round 3. So when you look at the total number of significant strikes and then against that there's 2 takedowns, I can see why they would give him that round. Which means that it boils down to, I mean, round number 2, I don't think anybody can say that O'Malley won that one. So he comes back to round number 1. And then we look at the volume is in Jan's favor. Takedowns in Jan's favor. And then significant strikes are in O'Malley's favor, but only by 4 strikes. So that's not a huge advantage. If those 4 punches, I guess, because O'Malley didn't kick all that much, if they count those 4 punches higher, they give them a higher value than a takedown, the one takedown. Okay, that's it. I disagree, but we can argue about how the rules should be, how they should be counted, how the points should be distributed, and so on. Not gonna, again, this is an endless discussion in MMA circles. I'm not going to go there. Overall, and I'm going to write on Patreon, the next article that I'm going to do is about Sean O'Malley, specifically in this fight and the aftermath. I'll just to give you a quick preview. Look at what he said after the fight in the interview with DC. You could see it on his face. He was like, fuck, I can't believe I won. He did not look like a winner. He didn't talk like a winner. And he basically said, could have gone either way. I'm not quite sure. I don't know, blah, 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 and so on. He knows that he did not beat up Peter Yan, and he knows very well that he didn't really have a clear victory here. There's a reason why it became a split decision, because at least one judge gave it to Yan. So, and I agree with that. If it were me judging, I think I would have given it to Yan. I think the reason why O'Malley racks up significant strikes and points is that if you look at in what he likes to do, he pumps out that jab repeatedly, and he landed it. Now, if it lands, do they consider that a significant strike, even if it doesn't back up Peter Yan at all, even if he's totally unfazed by it or he counters? I would argue that that's not that much of a significant strike, especially if the next thing Jan does is almost take O'Malley's head off with a counter hook. But again, it all boils down to looking at how the judges use the scoring system and how they interpret it. But overall, I think even the biggest Sean O'Malley fan is going to have a hard time actually claiming that O'Malley soundly beat Peter Yan. He won a victory on points, but there was no beatdown. That didn't happen. So a lot of people are upset. I mean, just go on social media, you'll see everybody getting all upset about this fight. I think it's sad in the sense that I like Jan as a striker, obviously the wrestling as well, and he did the step and trip that I like to do. Um, when I was in my prime, I'm an old man now, but it's one of my favorite moves, and my students still hate me for it when I do it on them. But he, as a striker, I mean, he's really good. The thing mostly is that, and again, I'll get to that when in my Patreon article, when O'Malley basically admitted that that's the first time he's been hurt like that. And then we get to tall man syndrome, or dominant advantage syndrome, which I'll explain in the article. So we'll see what happens next. I mean, I don't know where Jan goes from here. It's going to be interesting to see who they're gonna match him up with next. No idea. Will O'Malley get a title shot out of this? Because basically Peter Jan's the number two guy in the division. That would be crazy, I'd say. But it's the UFC, so anything is possible. Who the hell knows? Um, Despite everything that I just said about O'Malley, I mean, he's not a bad fighter at all. I'm going to do again. I'm going to go deeper into all that in the Patreon article about he's very tall for his division. He's what was it that they said before the fight, like the second tallest guy in the division. That always skews what somebody shows when they fight if they've got a dominant advantage. And I think this is the first real test, and he passed because he won the fight, so we can't argue with that. And whether you agree with the judges or not doesn't matter at this stage. It's his record is that he won against Peter Jan. Um, I also wouldn't say that Jan beat him up. I mean, he clearly, in my opinion, dominated throughout the fight. O'Malley was only able to back him up a few times. And then when Jan got cut, obviously the cut bothered him tremendously, but he wasn't able to push Jan back very often and or for a long time. And Jan was constantly threatening. And if he landed something, it tended to be pretty hard shots. I mean, the very nice left hand feint and then left body kick that Jan threw, you could see O'Malley was hurt by that. So aside from a few shots, it never looked like O'Malley was threatening that much. Again, he landed and he had a few shots that landed well and that you could see that Jan was affected by them, but it didn't back him up so that he stopped, coming forward, which meant that the threat was always there. So the forward pressure that O'Malley was feeling from Jan was pretty much constant, barring a few exceptions. He handled it well, but he had a rough time. This could have ended very, very differently. So we'll see how that goes, which brings us to the next fight, the bantamweight title bout. Huge disappointment for everybody. I mean, look, nobody wants to win a belt like that. I mean, Sterling is a controversial figure a little bit because of the way he got the belt against, because of a DQ by Jan, that stupid knee on the grounded opponent. I mean, it happens, but that's that you don't want to win a belt like that. And this year, the big return of TJ Dillashaw, and it ends like that with this injury right away in the beginning of the first round. You don't want to win a title like that. Now, Sterling is very cognizant of the fact that UFC is an entertainment company and not just a sport, but it's about entertainment. So in the post-fight interview, he is calling out pretty much everybody, and playing the heel, playing the villain, and playing that role, and that's fine. I mean, he can do that. He's trying to get the hype going. He's trying to get people excited about him as a champ, and try to further his career, and that's all fine. That's how the big game is played nowadays. But nobody can say that this was the best fight ever. Quite on the contrary. So, good for Sterling. He's got the belt. It's fine. But it's not. I mean, this fight will not go down in history as one of the best fights ever. What we do have is that the return of Dillashaw, and the guy's a warrior. I mean, you can see that fighting with a dislocated shoulder, that pops in and out, and Sterling was just beating him up pretty bad at the end. I mean, I'm just checking here, 72 landed strikes, 72 significant strikes, 72 of 148. So that's a lot of strikes in barely 2 rounds. So you could see that Dillashaw actually he hung in there for as long as he could, but the fight was pretty much over in the first, what is it, 20 seconds after the first takedown. I mean, it was kind of hard to see. I think you could see that Sterling just went in for the takedown. He picks up TJ's leg and drives forward. And it looks like when TJ was going to post with his left arm, which is a bad idea because your whole body weight is going to come into that shoulder. And it looks to me like just before he did that, it was already popping out, but I could be wrong. Um, but at the very least, posting on a shoulder that is injured as somebody takes you down like that is a terrible idea. Now, a lot of people still do it, and you can get away for it for a long time. But the moment you don't, then you get an instant injury. The fight went on for quite a bit longer. So again, Dillashaw is clearly a tough guy. He toughed it out and did the best he could, but there was no way he was going to win that fight anymore, barring some freak shot or punch or kick, whatever that landed, and would have knocked Sterling out. But Sterling's no beginner either. He wasn't going to take stupid risks. He did what he had to do to win. Again, nobody wants to win like that, not even Sterling. But you can, obviously he can't give up either and say like let's do it again when you're healed up. I mean, the fight's on, so you gotta finish the fight. Now, Dillashaw said that he dislocated his shoulder in April, and that in fight camp it dislocated 20 times. Here's the thing. I understand there's a lot at stake for the guy. He's making his return. He needs to make money because he's a professional fighter, so he's got to earn an income. And he ended up with a fucked up shoulder throughout his training camp, and it was continuously popping out. Now, if your shoulder pops in and out 20 times, right, that's not a good thing. Go talk to an orthopedic surgeon who specializes in shoulders. Go talk to a physical therapist. See what they say about popping your own shoulder in and out. And I know for the people who are my age, Mel Gibson in the Lethal Weapon movies would do it constantly. Yeah, okay, it's a movie. It's not good for your shoulder. The stability of your shoulder joint is compromised. There was a fight, I think it was in one championship recently, where there's this fighter, he pops, his shoulder pops out, and the coach just you know resets it, and it pops back in. The guy still had to go to the hospital afterwards and get surgery because all the ligaments and all that stuff on the inside is just messed up. So if Dillashaw's been basically for about half a year training with a compromised shoulder, and now he fought with that, immediately popped out, popped back in again after the first round during the break, but it popped back out right away again, and he got beat up because of that. That shoulder is seriously compromised. Now Dillashaw, he's not in the beginning of his career, so this kind of stuff typically when you want to heal it up correctly takes a while. It takes a lot of therapy. It takes a lot of time to get a fully recovered shoulder, if that is even possible. I mean, I had shoulder surgery because of I tore the labrum and one of the rotator cuff muscles. Yeah, that's took about 6 months to get back to basically being able to hit with full power. I could have done it sooner, but that would have been running a risk. Does Dillashaw have 6 months to fully heal up his shoulder? I'm guessing he thinks he doesn't, and I'm guessing he's kind of fucked now. Now, can he come back? Of course. I mean, there's a lot of excellent therapy, and medicine has gone a long way. Specifically, sports medicine has gone a long way in handling these injuries. But he already had shoulder surgery. So as my surgeon told me when I asked, when can I start punching again? And he's like, punching, boxing, and he was like, I said, okay, give it another month, which I did. I waited a little bit longer than a month. Actually, I waited 2 months longer to be sure that it would heal up because I didn't want to have a second surgery. And he said, you have to understand that you don't have a new shoulder. You've got a patched up shoulder. So it is weaker than it was before. And that's what Dillashaw has now. He has a shoulder that is weaker than before because all those dislocations. So we'll see where he goes from here. Um, Again, sad for the guy. Would have been nice to see how that fight would have gone. Dillashaw has this really specific style of stand up with a lot of footwork and trying to create angles and so on. I thought that Sterling didn't look bad at all in the few exchanges that they had because most of the time the fight was on the ground. But we'll never know. I mean, we'll never know. Will Dillashaw be able to get a second shot at Sterling? I have no idea. I think it's not in the immediate future. And again, Sterling called out other people, so he's going to try to defend his belt against somebody else. So, in realistically speaking, you never know with the UFC because they've done crazy shit before. But realistically speaking, I think Dillashaw is might get a shot in a year's time, which means that's a lot of lost time for him. So we'll see. Getting to the main event, Charles Oliveira versus Islam Makhachev. A lot of people were riding on the hype train, as they said it, that we're riding against the hype train of Mahashev. They said Olivera was going to demolish him. A lot of people were on Islam's side and saying like, no, you have no idea. The Dagestani wrestling is so powerful, and they're gonna he's gonna destroy Olivera on the ground. And everyone's like, no, Olivera is so dangerous on the ground. In his guard, he's so dangerous, and he fights excellently from his back. Blah blah blah. Like I competed against Dagestani guys. Way back when dinosaurs roamed the earth, and I competed in Sancho. I fought the world champ 3 times, and afterwards, many years later, relatively recently, when we basically connected again via social media, turns out that I thought he was Russian. No, he's from Dagestan. So I'm like, yeah, okay, that makes sense now that you're such a tough son of a bitch. But I mean, anyway, nothing but respect for my former nemesis. But back to the fight. What do we see? Um, you could see that Islam made a lot of progress in striking. That was clear. I mean, he didn't have to back up for Olivera at all. He tactically withdrew, used footwork well to manage distance. But in the very first round, I think it was at about 10 seconds, he just throws this excellent left straight punch right on the nose of Olivera. He just lands that left straight. And that put Charles on notice that, okay, can't just, bum rush this guy and beat him up. He tried, but that was the first warning he got that, okay, in the striking department, you're not going to have an easy fight. So that's the first thing. Second thing, it goes to the ground. So again, Olivera does what he always does. He immediately, puts you in his guard and he tries to attack from there. Now he tried several times, and here we can see again the Dagestan wrestling, the top control that these guys have, the pressure, the control over the opponent. It's just, I mean, Mahashev did an excellent job there. There's no discussion. There's not really a single attempt that Olivera could have that he did actually that made it dangerous. There wasn't a single time that you could see that Olivera was actually getting further into a submission or anything else that Islam was actually in danger. He tried a few times, but it didn't go far. There was the up kick that's one, I mean, landed, but okay, it looked again like Islam saw all he saw the big flash in front of his eyes, and saw maybe a little bit of birds tweeting around his head from the impact, but he immediately got back to beating up Charles and fighting him. So there was nothing there. So I think it's clear that Oliveira on the ground was being managed by Mahashev very, very clearly. There's no discussion. Now, that was the story of round one. Um, when you go to round two, so you could see that Charles was a lot more careful. There were several instances when you could see that normally he likes to go forward and pressure, that he was a lot more tentative. I think that goes back to that very first round. In the first 10 seconds, he gets this left straight, just square in the face. That he realizes that, okay, I can't just bum rush this guy. I can't just advance and expect him to back up, because he's not doing that. Mahashev several times actually countered quite well, a little bit clumsy sometimes, especially in the first round, but the power was definitely there, the speed was there, and Olivera couldn't just walk forward and expect to be able to bully Islam into backing up. That wasn't working. If you also look at the times that they spent in a high clinch, so Olivera kind of prefers this modified Muay Thai clinch. Um, Even there, he didn't get far. Islam actually, in my opinion, typically controlled that quite well and was never really in danger. And typically, that's where you see Oliveira just beating people up as well when it takes them into a modified Thai clinch and works from there and keeps putting the pressure on. He didn't manage to do that either. Then we get to obviously to the end. Um, Oliveira opened the fight with that, jumping scissor kick. He it looked to me like he was trying to do that again. He didn't get to extend the right leg. It looked like more like a half knee, half kick. Maybe he was going for the kick. I don't know. Regardless, the range was off. He was too close. If you look at him as he jumps up to do the kick, you will see that Islam's fist is pretty much touching his chest. That's really close. Biggest disadvantage of jumping techniques is that you have to land. And only when you land are you truly able to defend yourself again. You can try to shell up and cover up as you're, sailing through the air and about to hit the ground. But you can't really move away from the path that you're on. As soon as you clear the air, clear the ground, and you're up in the air, there's a path back to earth, and you will eventually have your feet on the ground again in a specific spot. You can't really change that all that much where you land. And if you're close to the guy, as Olivera was here, and you do that, and he has the opportunity to counter you, he can see where you're going to land. Now you can see that Olivera's left hand was relatively high, but it wasn't high enough. That counter hook that Islam threw was just really a thing of beauty. It landed perfect. Olivera on his ass, and then it was pretty much over a little while later. So the joke was well done. I mean, you could see that it immediately, as Mahashev went to the ground with Charles, he spotted the opening immediately and immediately tried to pass all the way over to the side, getting out of that half guard, and increase the pressure on Charles. And you could see it as soon as that second leg cleared, and he was fully over to the side. I mean, Mahashev's pressure must have been enormous because Charles tapped right away. He knew he couldn't get out. So I think it's clear now. It was fun to see Habib come into the cage and explain the next plan they have. Um, First, what's going to happen with Oliveira? I mean, he deserves a title defense, a rematch. Sorry. So I'm thinking that Islam should defend his title against Charles again. The guy deserves it. Whatever you think of him, I mean, he's been pretty dominant in the weight class. So I would definitely want to see this happen again. Now that Oliveira knows that he can't just bully Mahashev, and he might adapt his tactics a little bit to that. But it looks like we're gonna see it's gonna be a super fight with Islam versus Volkanovski. Um, I mean, people have talked about but at what weight are they gonna do that, dude? Look up Volkanovski when he was playing rugby. I mean, that guy was was jacked. He was huge for his size. So it's not going to be all that difficult, I think, for him to bulk up and add some mass to his frame. He's been there before. He should be able to do it again. Um, I'm assuming that he's going to do it clean. I'm assuming that he's not going to take all the Mexican supplements that are out there. Let's assume that. But I mean, he has been really big before, mostly muscle. It should be doable for him to go up in weight class and do that in a sound way, so that he retains his skills, his speed, and so on. That should be possible. So we'll see when, if and when that happens, because again, this is UFC, so anything can happen. The craziest stuff happens, but I think that Uncle Dana is gonna want to have a fight like that. I mean, that this is too good to pass up on. I think the fans definitely want to see that, and UFC for the last few years has done a bunch of those super fights, as they like to call them. Um, I mean, remember the bad motherfucker belt with Nate Diaz and what's his face, Street Jesus. Oh shit, no, I can't remember the name anymore, guys. I'm tired. It's been a long day. Anyway, the point is that the UFC likes to do these kind of fights, so I would be surprised if it didn't happen. And we'll see then. I mean, Volkanovski has proven that over and over again that the difference in reach doesn't seem to be that much of a problem for him. He's been on the ground with Ortega, who's a pretty damn good ground specialist, and he's been in submissions that people are thinking like he's never getting out of that, and he got out of it. So we'll see. We'll see. I don't think he's faced a guy with the wrestling skills and the ground skill that Islam has. I don't think he's faced anybody like that. But we'll see. Um, when will that happen? No idea. I think the UFC is definitely going to push that one, but it's probably going to be sometime, maybe middle of next year or early next year if they hurry up about it. So we'll see. Well, I guess that's it. As always, thanks for listening. Like, share, subscribe. You can support me on Patreon, where there's a bunch of unique content that isn't posted anywhere else. As I said, the next thing I'm going to do is do an article about Sean O'Malley and the reason why it was difficult for him in this fight. And I hope that one's going to be useful for everybody there as well. All right, that's it, guys. Thanks. Take care. Bye.